I ended up, of course, following your work and thinking about the concept that you've outlined. And then I had the good fortune of listening to your podcast, and it was a long drive, and, and listening to the whole thing in one day.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I
What,
was driving
like
to the
500 episodes?
yeah, exactly.
Jesus. Wow.
I've listened to most of them in like one day. And my mind was like, I literally had my jaw dropping at a number of points in some of the interviews that you've had, and your perspective, I thought, is so important for the work that people like me are carrying on today, and the way that we're trying to figure out our relationship with AI and with big tech specifically. And the perspective that I bring into this is to think about artists and image makers and the way that they experience those changes. And by those changes, I mean, of course, the way that big tech impacts our field and our day to day, but also, I want to start with that idea of enshitification, and think about that also in relation to art making. So maybe a good place for us to start is if you can talk a little bit about enshitification and its historical context, its mechanics, and I'm also wondering about its present context.
Sure. Well, I mean, the overarching context is the 35-year fight for a sort of safe and prosperous digital world that EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, has fought for. I'm just about to start my 25th year with them, so this has obviously been a big part of my life, and I was weaned on stories of the fights they were engaged in. I mean, Bruce Sterling's 1992 book, The Hacker Crackdown, about the founding of EFF, it's hugely influential on me, as is so much of Bruce's work. And, the job of getting people to care about digital rights, it shares a lot of commonality with the job of getting people to care about the climate emergency, in that digital rights are very abstract, they're very technical, and when the problem was first sort of understood, the consequences were a long way off. And getting people to care about things that are technical and abstract and a long way off is very hard, because they've got a lot of immediate and concrete things in their lives that they're paying attention to. And so, as with the climate emergency, the project of getting people to care about tech issues before it's too late is the project of coming up with framing devices, narratives, metaphors, similes, parables, and sometimes funny words. And I came up with a funny word, and it was not the first funny word I came up with, and it was not just a funny word. It was a funny word that was married to a very complex sort of theoretical package that included, on the one hand, an observational component that described what happens when platforms go bad, that I think a lot of people resonated with, and that connected a lot of dots for people. It made them understand that their frustrations with, say, Amazon, and their frustrations with Uber, and their frustrations with Google were really all frustrations with different expressions of the same underlying phenomenon.
Mhm.
There's also a theoretical piece that hypothesizes a causal set of causal relationships that give rise to this, and specifically apportions blame, because I think that a lot of the earlier critiques have been a lot more neoliberal and focused on things like poor individual choice. You've probably heard, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. It's like the if you know anything about the history of the anti-littering campaign, the plastics industry, the oil industry rather, wanted to sell plastic, and they knew that the more plastic you sold, the more single-use plastic you sold, the more garbage there would be in the landscape. And so they invented this thing called littering. And they said, the problem isn't that we are filling the world with single-use plastic. The problem is that you're not throwing it away properly. And in the same way, there's a critique of tech that is like, you, the almighty consumer, failed to vote with your dollars with sufficient care and you are responsible for this predicament we're in. That's a very bad one. It's a very bad take. It's like saying, if only those people in the Palisades had sorted their recycling harder, they wouldn't have burned down, their houses wouldn't have burned down, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and then there's, I think that by locating the problem with the people who we should really blame, which is not just like the stock villains who I think deserve our disapprobation, which is the ketamine addled Zuckermuskian failures who run tech companies, but really to understand that like the reason these people get away with this garbage, the reason they do this stuff, it's the same reason your dog licks its balls. It's because they can, right? We have created a policy environment where the worse you are, the more money you make.
So,
And
so
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
just to just to put some contours around this, what would be the equivalent of the plastic, single-use
Sure.
plastic that is being
Yeah.
dumped all over the planet? Like, what would
Yeah.
be the equivalent of that within the tech sector?
Yeah. So, you know, if you're a physicist, you'll sometimes compose this thought experiment about what the perfect set of moving objects would be. And
Mhm.
you'll say, oh, well, if we had a perfectly spherical cow of uniform density on a frictionless surface, we can make these observations and predictions about its movement. In the same way, a business professor might say, well, the perfect business is one that charges infinity for its outputs, pays nothing for its inputs, right? Academic publishing, basically. Uh, but every other industry has to accept some friction that comes from the real world. There are no perfectly spherical cows of uniform density. And in the real world, if you charge too much or if you misbehave in other ways, you face consequences. One of them is that your competitors might steal your customers and your employees. And for a long time, we had a pretty robust antitrust environment that said that firms could not deliberately reduce the competition, the competitive environment, and the economy. And in instances where we couldn't tell why they were doing something, but it stood to reduce the competitiveness, things like predatory pricing or predatory mergers, we just stopped them. We would err on the side of caution, and then we threw that out. Neoliberal economists in the early '80s, same people who told us that littering was the problem with plastics and not the plastics,
Not the plastic.
they they said, monopolies are efficient. And like if you observe a firm in the wild that has amassed a 90% market share like Google has in search, you should assume that they made a product people love. And wouldn't it be perverse to punish a company for being so beloved that we all use its products, right? And
You're
so
just hating the most popular girl in class.
that's right.
It's all
That's
on
right.
you.
And so you are basically so they basically said stop enforcing anti-monopoly law and we got monopolies. And
Mhm.
competition was neutralized. Now there's another form of discipline. It doesn't come from markets, it comes from states called regulation. We tend to think of these as two separate realms, regulation and competition. But in reality, they're two sides of the same coin. Because when you allow a sector to sort of merge to monopoly, to become this kind of inbred, like Habsburg jaw having corporate entity, then it becomes more powerful than its regulators. For the referee to call the game, they have to be more powerful than the players, right? If the players can tell the referee to fuck off, then everyone gets to cheat. And when firms are larger than the states that are supposed to regulate them, they get to cheat. And moreover, when firms are merged to monopoly, they find it very easy to resolve their differences about what their preferred policy outcomes are. 100 companies in a sector are a rabble. They can't agree on anything. They can't even agree on like where to have a meeting where they conspire about what they were going to agree on, right? But let a sector dwindle to 5 companies, and they find it very easy to rig the market.
Coordinate and rig the market. So
Yeah,
we end up with a market that works not in our favor, but works in their favor to
sure.
serve
And
their
a
interests.
regulatory environment too.
Exactly.
You get both, right? So you lose competition and regulation at the same moment, right?
Mhm.
You can't really have regulation without competition. I tell my libertarian friends this, that if they think that the only role for the government is to enforce contracts, they still need governments that are more powerful than the corporations whose
Still need the tech.
contracts they're enforcing. So the
Hmm.
smallest government you can have is determined by the largest corporations you're willing to tolerate,
Yeah.
right?
And in addition to that, then you get, while this process is happening, then the relationship also between the leaders of the big tech industry become friendlier and friendlier with
Sure,
regulators,
of course.
up to
Well,
the
and
point
with
where we
each
have,
other.
and with each other, which is
Because if there's
true.
five companies in a sector, they all know each
They
other. I
all
mean,
know each other.
Burbank,
You
how many
imagine one room with all of these people together? Like that must be the world's worst, most unfun meeting to be in.
I mean, go down to Alameda, walk down Executive Row at the Frank G. Wells building at Disney, and ask how many of those people used to be executives at Warner's or Universal,
Hmm.
right? Because in an org chart that's crowded, there are as many lateral moves as there are vertical ones.
Mm-hmm.
And the org chart gets very crowded as you get to the top. And so the more senior you are, the more likely you are to have worked at multiple firms in the same sector. So these people, they're like in the same polycules, they're executors of each other's estates, they're godparents to each other's children, they play pickleball with each other, right? So like they don't need to like have a smoke-filled room to emerge a conspiracy, right? It's just like drinks after someone's funeral,
Yeah.
right? And that they're all attending. So this is so these are policy choices, right? We make this policy choice to allow monopolization. We get monopolies, we lose regulation. And then, what happens is that you get captured regulators who aren't just captured in a way that causes them to let firms evade regulation or stops regulation that is antithetical to the firm's interests from emerging. They also allow firms to mobilize regulation, particularly against nascent competitors, new market entrants. And this is where IP law comes in.
Yeah.
So one of the laws that I'm very interested in and very concerned with is a suite of laws called anti-circumvention laws. And these are laws that prohibit the production of technology that modifies another technology.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you design a pair of shoes so that they'll only take the manufacturer's shoelaces, then removing whatever it is that stops you from putting someone else's shoelaces in becomes a crime. So Congress never makes the Nike shoes have to have Nike shoelaces law. But because they made a law saying it's illegal to tamper with the thing that stops you from putting someone else's shoelaces in the shoes, Nike can conjure a new law into existence. Now, Nike can't do that because their shoes aren't digital. But anti circumvention law applying to digital technologies has affected a wider and wider constellation of technologies and devices because now chips are so cheap that everything's got a chip in it. And so, we have anti circumvention law stopping you from putting third party coffee pods in your coffee maker,
Yeah.
right? And third party ink in your printer, but also from connecting a third party continuous glucose monitor to your insulin pump, or allowing a third party to repair the hospital's ventilator. A company called Medtronic owns all the ventilator companies in the world. They bought them all. They pretend they're Irish. They did the largest ever tax inversion. They sold themselves to a tiny, insignificant Irish firm so that they could have all of their profits shifted to Ireland so they would float in a state of untaxable grace in the Irish Sea. And so they rig their ventilators so that if you put a part into the ventilator, even one of their own parts, it won't start working until a Medtronic technician comes to the hospital and types an unlock code. And that's a $200 service call.
Mm.
And, this is bad, right? Obviously. But it's really bad during the pandemic because you have hospitals that are harvesting donor screens from dead ventilators and putting them into working ventilators with dead screens, but they don't work because Medtronic not only won't fly a technician to the hospital to type the unlock code into the ventilator's keyboard, they cannot
Yeah.
because there are no flights. And this is the moment we need the ventilators the most. So, anti-circumvention law is a very interesting example because, like competition law, it's one of those things where when we reformed it, when we changed the way the rules worked, there was a very sizable cohort of experts who told the policymakers, if you do this, bad things are going to happen, right? The outcomes of anti-circumvention laws were not only foreseeable, they were foreseen. And the policymakers who pressed ahead with this rule, they deliberately created the enshitogenic environment that rewards firms for being bad. And today, those policymakers, they don't face any consequences. They're not remembered in history as great monsters, right? We know that Mark Zuckerberg's an asshole. But who remembers Bruce Lehman, the author of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act? This guy's like, he's 92 years old. He's considered one of the great lawyers in American history. He lives in Florida. He was Bill Clinton's IP czar. He's a millionaire. No one thinks of him as one of the architects of our misery, right? And so by recovering that lost history of the foreseeable and foreseen policy choices in living memory and the people who made them, we can go from this kind of helpless feeling that we are prisoners of the great forces of history or the iron laws of economics and understand that these choices were made, they could be unmade. We know what kind of people made those choices. We know who their intellectual progeny are. We can keep those people away from the levers of power forever, and we can start to reclaim our technology.
So we're facing an environment where our platforms, in a sense, are rigged to work against us. And by that, I mean against our needs, against
Yeah.
the needs of our children and our children's children. They're rigged to work for the benefit of the companies that have set them in place. And in some cases, to work for the benefit of the governing bodies that have set them in place.
Sure, the state. There's often these public-private partnerships. You see this with surveillance a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's just a commonplace that you have technology vendors that say, "Oh, we will just spy on, our owners and tell the cops about stuff." But back when Ring was getting started, the pitch was Ring will help you catch porch pirates, right?
Yeah.
And then it was like, but also maybe the cops will sometimes ask you for your footage, and it's up to you. You decide whether you want the cops to be able to see your footage. And it quickly became apparent that the cops were able to get that footage whether or not you said you wanted them to.
Yeah.
And also that the cops have become kind of street marketing teams for Ring cameras. So Ring was doing things like partnering with cops and giving them like 10 free Ring cameras to give out in raffles. And they had apps that were like Nextdoor, but all they would do is like send out information about crime in your neighborhood, in neighborhoods nearby, in neighborhoods 10 neighborhoods over, just to make you afraid and tell all your friends you need a Ring because there's so much crime.
So much crime happening. Yeah.
And the reason that the cops and the state don't are so favorable to our poor privacy environment, because we haven't had a new consumer privacy law federally in America since 1988, when Ronald Reagan made it illegal for video store clerks to disclose VHS rental history. Like, that is literally the last act of privacy invasion that we made illegal, right?
So disgusting too. Like, could they didn't want people to be able to see the VHS because of what they read. Never mind.
Because of their rent. Well, specifically, the judge, Robert Bork, who wrote the book that argued that monopolies were good, a book called The Antitrust Paradox.
Mm-hmm.
He was nominated for a Supreme Court seat. And he was a virulent racist and just kind of a corrupt asshole. He had been Nixon's Solicitor General. When Nixon ordered his officials to fire all the lawyers who disagreed with him, all of them said no except for Bork, who said yes. And in the run-up to Bork's confirmation hearing, when he was nominated for the Supreme Court, someone leaked his video rental history. And the thing is that, like, the best thing you could say about Robert Bork is he had pretty good taste in movies.
Oh, there you go.
But as you say, in Congress, they were like, oh, fuck, I spent a lot of time behind the beaded curtain at the video rental place. I am in so much trouble here. So they passed a law. So, the fact that we don't have a privacy law, in part, it's because whenever Congress gets close, the cops show up, and the spooks, the feds, and so on.
Sure.
And they say, we can't have a privacy law because we rely on this public-private partnership. with the surveillance tech companies, and not just the ones that overtly surveil like Ring, but also like Google and Facebook and so on.
Yeah.
They are, we were worried when Roe v. Wade died. There was all this worry that it was going to be like period tracking apps that were going to be used to bust women. It's actually just Facebook messages,
Yeah,
right?
you
Like,
don't need more than, yeah, you actually don't need more than that. But wait, let me bring this then back to the here and now. Let's,
uh-huh.
you mentioned Roe v. Wade. Let's bring it now to 25 and now 26 and bring in AI to this equation. What happens to the idea of enshitification once you start looking at AI? Like, what happens when you're thinking about the way we're engaging differently with platforms
Sure,
because of AI? And I'm also thinking about how I didn't ask Google to become an AI machine for my benefit as a user.
sure,
I didn't want to have the AI summary as my first result when I
sure,
but
sure.
I had AI all over me all of a sudden. Can you
Yeah, yeah.
talk about that in relation to the ideas that you bring up in those histories?
Well, it's complicated. When you criticize a technology like AI, you have to be careful not to take their claims about what it can do at face value. So you have to criticize, on the one hand, what they say they plan on doing, but you also have to criticize what is likely to happen.
Hmm.
So, there's a term for this. It comes out of STS. I can never remember what the acronym stands for. Something technology studies, science and technology studies.
Mm-hmm.
There's an STS researcher at Virginia Tech named Lee Vinsel who coined this term critihype. And that's when you repeat their hype as criticism.
Hmm.
So this was big during the surveillance capitalism discourse, where it was like Mark Zuckerberg has built a mind control ray, and that's really bad, right? And so, like, Mark Zuckerberg really likes for his critics to run around and say he's got a mind control ray because it
Sure.
helps him sell advertising,
Yeah.
right? Like, why should you pay a 40% premium to advertise on Facebook? Well, my critics will tell you I built a mind control ray. Would you like to sell ice cream to the Inuit? I can do it for you. I got the mind control ray. So, a lot of AI is mostly not real, right? To the extent that it's doing things that matter in the world, it's doing them because they spent 600 billion to 700 billion dollars in capital expenditures, and this is a sector that is annually bringing in, by their own account, worldwide, $60 billion a year. Now, that is a grossly inflated number
Hmm.
because it includes things like the $10 billion that Microsoft gave to OpenAI and OpenAI gave back to Microsoft. That's not revenue, right? Like, if you're walking down the street and a teenager in a green apron gives you a $7 voucher for a latte at Starbucks, and you go in and you get a latte, Starbucks doesn't get to book that voucher as $7 in revenue, right? They are poorer by the price of the inputs to the latte and the labor of the barista. They are not richer, right? And Microsoft had to use electricity and burn out GPUs to supply the $10 billion worth of compute that OpenAI bought from them. So you have this sector, they're out $700 billion, they're making $50 billion. How long do they have to make back all the money before the $700 billion wears out, right? The equipment is gone. Well, they'll tell you it's 5 years, but privately they're amortizing them over 2 to 3 years. So they somehow have to make $700 billion at the rate of $50 billion a year in 2 years, right? And then you have like the Magnificent Seven, the seven AI stocks that are passing around the same $100 billion IOU really fast and pretending it's in all of their bank accounts at once. And they're 32% of the stock market, which is very scary. And so, this is the reality of AI, that like anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. AI is so expensive to do inference on, right? To not just to train, but to run, that it's not even clear that if all the AI companies go bankrupt and their assets can be purchased for pennies on the dollar, that you could run an AI company profitably, because you would have to charge so much for inference that you would just not have enough customers,
So are
right?
we in the midst of a bubble that is about to
Oh,
burst on
yeah.
our stock market, do you think?
Oh, yeah. No, we are in the midst of a horrific and terrifying bubble. And if you're looking for stock tips, buy long poles to dig through the rubble for canned goods when 30% of the stock market is vaporized overnight. No, this is really fucking bad. 2008 is going to look like the best day of your life.
Corey, but
This
we're
is
already
very bad.
exhausted. Do you think that we're the like we as a populace right now? I'm talking about the U.S. specifically. That we're already so exhausted by everything that has been happening around us since COVID that we're that it's part of the reason why AI companies are able to pull this for such a long time.
I think it's a complex story. I think that it has to do with way that the capital markets treat growth stocks. So if you can imagine two firms that have the same unit economics, they every time they sell something, they make the same amount of money. They're selling about the same number of things, but one of them is growing and
Mm-hmm.
the other one is mature, right? So it's just producing a predictable return for its owners every year. It's profitable, but the growing one will have a much higher what's called price to earnings ratio. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how much your company is worth relative to how much it's bringing in. If you bring in $1 million a year and your stocks are worth cumulatively $10 million, you have a 10-to-1 PDE ratio, right? Growth stocks have sometimes triple digit PDE ratios, whereas mature stocks, it's like low double digits, sometimes single digit. And the thing about having a growth stock that is that valuable is it's highly liquid. You can use it where other firms would have to use cash. Particularly, you can use it to make expenditures that fuel growth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to hire key employees or if you want to make a key acquisition, you don't have to give them dollars. You can give them stock. Your competitor, right, the mature company, they have to give them dollars, which they can only get from like a creditor or a customer. If you make your own dollars on the premises, the Treasury Department pays you a visit and leads you out in handcuffs, right?
Yeah.
But stock, you type zeros into a spreadsheet, right? And so Amazon and Target bidding against each other for the same logistics company, right? Because they want to do faster fulfillment. Target has to find dollars. Amazon types zero into a spreadsheet. Who wins that bidding war? Amazon every time,
Every time.
right? And so here's the problem. Anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. When you have a 90% market share, you cannot keep growing, right? If you can't find an adjacent market to grow into, or if you can't find ways to turn the screws on your existing suppliers and customers, or both, then you will eventually mature. And when you mature, you'll become overvalued by like between 4 and 10 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be a mass sell off because your shareholders know it and they know that day is coming and they are sleeping with one hand over the sell button. And so you see this sometimes when firms post anemic growth or contraction. I think, I'm a leftist. I think the left often criticizes firms' obsession with growth as though it were an ideological matter.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's one thing that a leftist should remember is that things are really about material, the material world. And the material reality is that in January 2022, when Mark Zuckerberg told his investors that he'd gotten slightly less American growth than he had projected in the previous calendar year, they staged a one day $240 billion sell off of his shares. It was the largest corporate contraction in world history. A quarter of $1 trillion wiped off Facebook's share price in a day, right? This is why Mark Zuckerberg cares about growth. It's not because he has the ideology of a tumor. It's because when he stops growing, there will be like a 5-to-1 revaluation of his company, right? So this is why he's worried. And so companies that have saturated their markets need to come up with growth stories. And in the early days, tech companies used to pretend that they were going to steal each other's lunch, right? So one day Google wakes up and says, "We're going to be Facebook. Look at Google Plus. That's going to be Facebook." Right? So that's the market we're going to grow into. Then Facebook wakes up and says, "We're going to be YouTube. Look at the pivot to video." Right? But the problem is that if you claim that you're going to capture a market that someone else dominates, analysts and investors and consumers and suppliers, they can kind of look and they can go, "You kind of suck at being YouTube," right? Like they can say it, right?
Google Plus, as soon as you said Google Plus, I was like, I forgot Google Plus. There
Yeah,
was a moment where they were like, we're going to be all of it for you. You
right.
wouldn't have to do anything else but log into your Google
And
and
then
it'll
it's
be
going to
part
do
of
the whole, it'll be your everything. Yeah.
everything. Oh,
So, so the thing is that, in the same way that the Christian right only cares about babies that don't exist, right? Like babies that haven't been born and babies that are like in imaginary pizza parlor restaurant
yeah.
basements.
Because the
Uh,
ones that are born might grow up to have opinions.
well, and
No
they
one
have
wants
like
that.
demands even before they grow up. They need feeding, and
Ugh.
their moms need medical
And
care, and
health.
they want to
Oh,
go to school, and so
uh,
like it's always easier to make assertions about things that don't exist.
yeah.
And so, if you can make assertions about a market that does not exist yet, it's much harder to assess the truth. And so they go from saying, "Oh, we're going to be YouTube, we're going to be Facebook," to saying, "We're going to run the metaverse." Which doesn't exist, right?
Doesn't.
So you can make claims about the metaverse, right? We're going to do cryptocurrency, blockchain, Web3, NFTs, and now it's AI, right? And AI is stale, so now it's super intelligence. And
So
so, sorry,
uh,
go ahead.
I was just gonna add to that. What I am interested in this context, though, is as you've mentioned the blockchain and NFTs. I'm also thinking about um, the field of images and
Sure.
NFTs. Of course, crashed, burned horribly. It didn't work out well, but at the same time, after the initial boom had happened and after the first crash had happened, there is still a market for NFTs. There are still artists that
Sure.
produce and are able to make some sort of living by using NFT. And if NFTs, and if we're thinking specifically about visual artists,
Uh-huh.
NFTs were the first time in human history that visual artists received the opportunity to actually make something from the secondary market because
Not
forward sales
really.
were baked into
That's
the contract.
that's not how smart. So the thing is, that's a scam. So here's the
Let's
thing.
talk about that then.
So smart contract. So in the smart contract, you have code, right? Usually written in Rust, and it has like a conditional operator, like if I see an event called a sale,
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
give 10% of the sale price to this wallet, right? So that's the secondary market aspect of it. There is no reason that the transaction has to be called a sale. You can call the transaction a sale underscore one.
So you can easily
It's
keep
not
the
illegal
artist
to
out
do
of the.
that. You can just sidestep it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything about NFTs was aimed at bilking people by telling a superficially plausible technical story that you needed to have a relatively sophisticated technical background to understand. So even just the story of an NFT, so an NFT is just an entry in a blockchain that is a URL and an identifier, right? Like a person.
Mm-hmm.
And the implication is I own this URL, right? Like I made it, right? But I can make an NFT for whitehouse.gov, right?
Yeah,
Like I can do it,
absolutely. Yeah.
right? So NFT does not solve the problem of who made this,
Yeah.
right? It just irretrievably records falsehoods that about who made things that can never be erased,
They can never
right?
be erased, but can also create new problems over time, but also new opportunities perhaps for artists. What I'm trying to say is, I think we're not done with NFTs. I think they're not going away.
Huh.
The market is mutating and changing and is finding its way into new turf. It didn't really work when they tried to. It didn't really work in the scale that they wanted when they tried to embed NFTs into objects, right?
Uh-huh.
We were supposed to have like a smart fridge with NFTs by default
Uh,
baked into it and all that. That really, maybe
but
it will happen.
so much of the NFT market was wash trading, right? It was just scams. If you want to read some really interesting stuff about what NFTs could be, so the person who invented NFTs, my friend Anil Dash,
Mm-hmm.
he's a very good guy, and it was at like a code sprint, and he was like, "What if I, as a creator, could record an indelible entry thanking someone?" for doing something nice for me.
Mm.
So you do something nice for me. I put an entry in the blockchain that says, Cory leaves, Cory has this URL and acknowledges Rotem, right? And so that would just be a nice thing, right? It's purely normative, right? It's there. There was no enforcement mechanism because it was never understood as a tool for fueling markets. It was um, meant as a system for working within gift economies.
Hmm.
And I'm a working artist. That's my job. I write novels, right? And I get it, right? Like I get that there's an uneasy line between commerce and art, gift economies, and the need to pay your kids' dental bills. But I NFTs, like the whole thing was a scam. That's the problem, right? Like there are parts of it that are interesting, and blockchains are also one of these things where there's like the blockchain that everyone wants is something called a permissionless blockchain where anyone can be in the blockchain, and that's why you have to burn down a whole rainforest every time you want to figure out who owns this NFT. And there's another kind of blockchain called a permissioned blockchain where you just say, oh, we're going to have like 100 people maintain this blockchain, and you'd have to suborn like 51 of them. And that's so hard that we're just going to trust it. And there's so many applications that works for, and you can run that off a couple of AA batteries, right? Like so, the stuff with the smart contracts was nonsense. It just doesn't work, right? Like so, if all you're going to do with this, if all you say, because when you point this out to smart contract weirdos, they say, oh well, it's just normative. Right, it's just normative, right? It's just like you should give the artist some of the money if it changes hands. Well, fine. Then just like print that at the bottom of the lithograph. When this lithograph sells, send Rotem 10%. Here's her PayPal address. And they're like, oh, well, that wouldn't work. I'm like, yeah, because it wouldn't fuel a giant bubble that lets you make money by lying to people,
Mm.
right? That's the only difference,
Yeah.
is that you can bamboozle people with technical gobbledygook so that they can part with millions of dollars. And you're right, there is like an NFT market and there are people who are trading NFTs. But you know what the major impact of NFTs was? Normal people lost their savings. That was what happened with NFTs.
Yeah.
Just normal people who thought that they were doing the right thing lost the money they needed to live a dignified life and a dignified retirement.
Mm.
And the people who made that money was not artists. This was not a transfer from normal investors to artists. It was a transfer from normal investors to con artists. And the artists mostly lost out, and the fans lost out, and the investors lost out, and rip-off artists made all the money. And that's true of like WorldCom, right? WorldCom, they lied to people about fiber, they stole people's money, and there's still fiber in the ground. The network link I'm on to you now, right now, it's AT&T lighting up old WorldCom fiber. I have 2 gigabit symmetrical fiber because WorldCom stole money from retirees and put fiber in the ground in Burbank. And those retirees died in poverty, and I get to have fiber. And like, I'm not going to say, well, I don't want the fiber now, right? And I can understand why someone might say, well, I still want the NFTs and the money I get from the NFTs and so on. But let's not pretend that it was good.
Yeah, no, I don't think that anybody is pretending that this was good. But at the same time, I'm wondering then how do you place, I'm thinking about the intersection, and then I want to ask you about artists and AI too. But
Sure.
I'm
And
also
just
thinking,
FYI, 14 minutes left.
oh, Cory, this conversation
Sorry.
will go on forever.
I
But
know.
um, I am thinking about how NFTs were also utilized by another part of our market that does not usually get talked about in these terms and should be, which is the auction houses. Because
Yep.
when they got into the game too, then NFTs moved from that
Yep.
area that we don't have access to unless we have a wallet, to like headlines in all of the major art
Sure.
magazines and business magazines. I'm curious about those relationship too between those two different, very different aspects of the market.
Well, to bring this back to enshitification, art dealers are just intermediaries, and intermediaries are fine. Um, there's a lot of things that people want to do, where to do the whole stack would require uh, so much effort on their part that many people wouldn't be able to participate in life or in culture. So when I was growing up in Toronto, there was a guy I used to see on the streets whose name was Crad Kolodny. He was this outsider writer, literally and figuratively, because he would sell his books outside. So he would write his own books, he would edit them, he would typeset them, he would have them printed, and he'd stand on street corners in Toronto with a sign around his neck that said, "Very famous Canadian author, buy my books." Or when he was feeling spicy, he had a sign that just said, "Margaret Atwood." And he was great. He was very weird. He was very funny. He was a good writer. His stuff's all on the Internet Archive now. He would do things like secretly record the drunks that abused him and then release best of cassettes, which you can also get on the Internet Archive. And like, as much as I love this guy, there are a lot of writers I want to hear from who are never going to write, edit, typeset, print, and sell their own books on a street corner. So, I'm happy to have literary agents and publishers and,
Mm.
booksellers and distributors. And the same is true of artists, right? There are plenty of things that even the artists who are capable of being their own gallerists want to go off and paint or take pictures or sculpt, right? They don't want to be a gallerist. They've got a thing they want to do. And not all of them, but many of them. And so the existence of the intermediary allows for a broader participation in culture, which is good. The problem isn't intermediaries. The problem is that when an intermediary becomes so powerful that they cease to be a helper and become a gatekeeper and begin to extract. So, one of the things about gallerists is that they don't just give a raw deal to artists, they give a raw deal to collectors too,
Mm.
right? Like the platforms, they're getting you coming and going. And it's not a law of nature, right? It's down to policy choices again about allowing Sotheby's to buy its direct competitors, about the creation of, the trailer parks around the airport of Geneva that are filled with containers filled with paintings because we allow free ports. It's zero interest rate policy and the everything bubble. Like all of that stuff creates the dysfunction of gallerists and the gallery system, and it's not intrinsic to the existence of intermediaries. Intermediaries are good. And you,
Yeah.
you talk about being a Xennial, the great thing that Gen Xers were excited about was disintermediation. And it wasn't, maybe we were unsophisticated, but we were right that the intermediaries, the 7 record labels that controlled the industry, were not our friends as music fans.
Yeah.
The problem is that like DIY only gets you so far, and you do need intermediaries. There are plenty of musicians I want to hear from who aren't going to live in the back of a van and sell their cassettes at house shows, right?
Yeah. So let's take it back then to we talked about how enshitification kind of gives us as consumers, as participants, really bad product that is designed to keep us coming back again and again. You're talking about you Gen Xers with your DIY conscious and how you were against the big monopoly of the big record labels. And I'm thinking about this moment that we're in, as we just talked about the moment of AI that was preceded by the moment of NFTs. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about visual artists specifically, and I'm thinking about the very complicated relationships the visual artists have now with AI and the great concerns that visual artists
Mm-hmm.
have, justifiably so, around copyrights and flooding the network with mountains upon mountains upon mountains of really machine generated images that in effect rot the visual art system that humans have put in place.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about the process of architification and
Mm-hmm.
its rapid involvement and how it impacts visual artists as
Yeah.
well.
So I've got a book coming out that has a whole section about this called The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI that's coming out in June. And it has a big section on AI art and copyright. And I have a slightly heterodox view. So I will agree with you that I think AI art is bad art. And I think the reason AI art is bad art is that art is what happens when a creative worker, an artist, has a numinous, irreducible, complex emotion that they attempt to infuse into some intermediary medium, a photo, a painting, a book, a sculpture, a dance, in the hopes that when an audience member experiences this work, that a facsimile of that numinous and irreducible emotion will materialize in their minds. And I have a colleague, a law professor, who told me that before chatbots, only your very best students would ask you for a letter of reference because writing the letters of reference is so tedious that you would have to really think your prof rated you before you'd ask for one. But now that chatbots are everywhere, the students know that you type 3 bullet points into a chatbot and it shits out a reference letter. And so now when they advertise for a postdoc, they're inundated with reference letters. Reference letters no longer mean this student is so valued that their prof wrote them a letter. It just means that they were able to nudge someone into putting 3 bullet points into a chatbot. And of course, what they do is they run these reference letters back through chatbots to turn them back into bullet points. And it's very funny because we all know immediately those are not the same bullet points, right? And the thing is that the reason that is striking and problematic is because we know that the chatbot knows nothing about the student, right? The only thing it knows is the original 3 bullet points, right? And so nothing in the letter that isn't those 3 bullet points are about the student. And so nothing in that letter is relevant. By the same token, when you prompt an AI to make an image or write a book, the only part of that that is communicative is the prompt. So if you think about the 3 sentences you give to the AI that turn into 1,000,000 pixels, what you've got is 3 sentences worth of artistic intent diluted to a homeopathic fraction that's undetectable across those 1,000,000 pixels. And this is why AI art is sometimes called eerie uh, um, or soulless, right? So eeriness, Mark Fisher calls eeriness the seeming of intent without an intender. And one of the reasons that I think AI art and AI writing was so striking when it first emerged is because we are not accustomed to encountering uh, art that doesn't have, a painting that doesn't have a painter, or novels that don't have writers. So we impute a writer or a painter to the work, and our brain goes to work trying to figure out what they meant. But really, all you're doing is like finding your own artistic intent. It's a Rorschach blot at that point.
Yeah.
There is nothing the chatbot has to say. So I think it's bad art. But I think that the reason our bosses love it is because they think that they can use it to immiserate us, right? The reason our bosses love it is because they want to make us poor. And because also there's the ego-shattering conflict of having to talk to people who know how to do things and think you're a fucking idiot that bosses have to live with. When I was walking the picket line at Warner's during the writer's strike, one of the writers said to me, you prompt an LLM the same way a studio boss gives shitty notes to a writer's room, right? Like, give me E.T., but make it about a dog and give it a love interest and put a car chase in the 3rd act, right? That's like, you say that to writers, they'll be like, why don't you go make a fucking spreadsheet, you goddamn suit? We are writing a fucking movie
Oh,
here.
they can.
Well, and so
But
now they just give it to the chatbot. The
yeah.
fact that it's not good is less important than the fact that no one calls you a fucking idiot, right? And so I think AI art is bad, and I think AI art is made for a bad reason. But I do not think copyright will fix this. So, do you remember when I said we were angry about the 7 music labels
Yeah.
that controlled the world when
Yeah.
I was a youngster? It's 3 music labels now.
Yes.
We have 5 publishers, 4 studios, 3 music labels, 2 companies that control the apps, and 1 company that controls all the ebooks and audiobooks. And for 40 years, we have monotonically expanded copyright. We've made copyright last longer. We've made it cover more uses. We've made the penalties stiffer. The media industry is larger and more profitable than it has ever been, and the share of income going to artists is smaller in real terms and as a proportion of those income of that income than ever. And the reason for that is that in an industry where artists have no bargaining power because of extreme market consolidation, giving a creative worker more copyright to bargain with is just giving them more copyright to bargain away. It's like giving your bullied kid extra lunch money. It doesn't matter how much lunch money you give the kid, the bullies are going to take it, right? And when you look at the conduct of the firms, they are not suing AI companies because they don't want to use AI, right? Like the day the Disney Universal case dropped against Midjourney, I got a press release in my inbox from the Recording Industry Association of America signed by Mitch Glazer, who's the CEO of the RIAA. He makes $1.3 million a year. Before Mitch Glazer was CEO of the RIAA, he was a congressional staffer. And the reason he's not a congressional staffer anymore is he slipped a clause into must-pass legislation that eliminated musicians' ability to claw back their copyright after 30 years, a critical piece of getting musicians paid when they sign bad contracts in their early careers. It was so outrageous that he was fired, and Congress did a special sitting to restore this right to musicians. Mitch Bainwell went to work for the Recording Industry Association of America. He does not represent musicians, right? He represents their bosses. He makes $1.3 million a year. And when Midjourney and Disney sued, or when Universal and Disney sued Midjourney, Universal and Disney aren't just movie studios, obviously, they're record labels. Universal is the largest record label in the world and the largest music publisher in the world. Opening sentence of this is, we are very disappointed because Midjourney could have negotiated for these rights. So he didn't say, I don't want Midjourney to make stuff that puts all of the musicians or all of the filmmakers or all the actors out of business. He said, I want the movie studios to get paid when they put them out of business. When Getty sues over image gen, it's not because they want to pay photographers, right? The only thing Getty hates more than having their photos stolen is paying photographers, right? So here's the thing. If we get more copyright, they're just going to use it to train, to like, they'll take it from us. It'll be in the standard boilerplate. You won't be able to negotiate it. They'll take it, they'll generate works, and we will lose. But there is a way we can win. So for 25 years, I have fought the U.S. Copyright Office on everything. And to my incredible surprise, I find myself in agreement with them because for 5 years, the U.S. Copyright Office has said time and again and litigated to the appellate division, works created by chatbots do not qualify for a copyright. For the same reason that the monkey selfie doesn't qualify for a copyright, right? Copyright is something that adheres to the moment of fixation of a work of human creativity. Not monkey creativity, not machine creativity, just human creativity. And again, the only thing Getty hates more than paying photographers is having its work taken without them getting paid for it. And if their works are all in the public domain, then no one has to pay them for them.
Yeah.
Right? So
They will never allow that to happen. Absolutely.
Yeah, so we need to lean into the Copyright Office here. And if we're going to get a new law passed, because we're running out of time here, but like, I also don't think copyright law prohibits training a model. I think that's just wish casting. When you break down the training a model into its parts, like even if you think it should, it just doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Like making a transient copy of a work for the purpose of analysis is like absolutely lawful. We wouldn't have search engines otherwise. You wouldn't have scholarship otherwise, right?
Absolutely.
Performing the analysis, also lawful, right? Publishing the analysis in a literary work like a software program, also lawful. And the fact that, Anthropic paid like whatever billions of dollars for downloading books from a shadow library, it's not because counting the words in the books was illegal. It's because they got the books illegally. If you go to a flea market and you buy a pirate CD and you count the adverbs in the lyrics, it's not a copyright infringement to publish the number of adverbs in the lyrics, right? So if we're going to say, okay, well, we don't like the way copyright works, but we're going to make a new copyright, a new law, right? Well, let's not make it a copyright law that our bosses will just use to take our copyrights and put us out of business. Let's make it a sectoral bargaining law, which is why the screenwriters won, because they are among the small number of workers in the United States who are grandfathered in when the Taft-Hartley Act was passed that banned sectoral bargaining, whereby all the workers in a sector bargain with all the employers in a sector, and we jettison this idiotic fiction that we are all small business people. We're like LLCs with an MFA, and we recognize that we are fucking workers and that we are in a class war with our bosses, and the way you win a class war is with a union. And so let's do that instead.
I love that. So wait, before you go,
Yeah.
anything you're optimistic about?
I have no optimism. I think optimism is stupid. It's just fatalism. It's the belief that things will get better no matter what we do. I have hope instead.
Hopeful? Are you
Hope.
hopeful about
I'm
anything?
very hopeful, weirdly, because of Trump, because everyone else in the world arranged their internet policy to look like America's internet policy because the US trade representative threatened them with tariffs if they didn't. And so now they have tariffs, and Trump has shown them that he's going to brick their IT if they don't step into line. Like the International Criminal Court swears that a genocide warrant for Netanyahu, they brick the ICC. Microsoft shuts down all of their document access, their email, everything. So everyone's like, we need to get the fuck off US digital infrastructure. And the only way they're going to be able to do that is not just by building parallel infrastructure, but by jailbreaking the tools so that they can extract their data.
Mm-hmm.
And so we now have people who want to make billions by taking America's trillions, right? Like selling you things to, make better use of the things that you own. And you have people who want to defend their national security, and you have digital rights hippies like me. And you put these three groups together, it's three armies Trump has summoned up to fight America's soft power over the internet. And I think we're going to win. This is the thing I'm super hopeful about.
Wow. So I wish you all the best with
Thank you
that.
very much.
And congratulations on the new book that's coming out. And
Yeah.
of course, I'm going to include links to all of that. And I hope that by the next time that I get to talk with you about all of this, you'll have more reasons to be hopeful, maybe?
Yes. Well, I might be in London by then.
Fine. That's a good reason to be hopeful as it is.
Yes,
But
indeed. They only have 100,000 fascists in Trafalgar Square. It's all going very well there. It's a very normal country. We're holding up a sign that says, I support Palestine action will get you thrown in jail.
well, with a heavy heart and a lot of sighs and wishes for good luck with everything that you're doing. Hope to see you again soon, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak.
Good night. Nice talking.
Bye-bye.